The Lincoln Public Library stood tall against the dark Boston skyline. I checked my watch as I walked up to the big oak doors, 7:45 p.m., 15 minutes early for my first night shift. This security job paid almost double what I'd made at the mall, which seemed too good to be true for just watching an empty building all night. The job listing had been straightforward. Maintain security from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., make regular patrols, ensure all doors remain locked. Nothing unusual for night security work. I'd done similar jobs through college, though never at a place as old or fancy as this 3-story brick building with its stone decorations and tall windows. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped into the lobby. The evening cleaning staff were finishing up, and a few librarians gathered their belongings at the circulation desk. The main floor was filled with rows of shelves, reading areas with leather chairs and computer stations, all lit up by warm-looking light fixtures. "Mr. Henderson?" a woman's voice called from behind the circulation desk. I walked over to a middle-aged woman in a dark suit. "That's me, Thomas Henderson. Everyone calls me Tom." "Sarah Miller." She didn't offer her hand. "Night manager. You can call me Sarah." She checked her watch with practiced precision. "You're early. Good. That gives us time to go over procedures." Sarah took me to a small office behind the circulation desk. Inside was a desk with security monitors, a logbook, and a phone. She handed me a set of keys. "This one is for the main doors," she explained, pointing to a large brass key. "This is for the staff entrances. This one opens the basement, though you won't need it. And this is for the supply closets." I nodded, trying to remember each key. Sarah pulled out a sheet of paper from a drawer. "These are the rules for night security at Lincoln. I expect you to follow them without exception." I grabbed the paper. Typed in bold letters across the top was Night Security Protocol, followed by 5 numbered rules. 1. Do not investigate strange noises or disturbances. Complete your rounds as scheduled. 2. Do not acknowledge anyone in the building after closing, even if they appear to be staff. 3. Never open the basement door after midnight, regardless of what you hear. 4. Stay out of the children's section after 9 p.m. 5. Do not engage with, assist, or speak to anyone who asks for help finding materials. I laughed, then looked up to see Sarah's face completely serious. "These seem a little unusual," I said. "Is this some kind of joke the staff plays on new guards?" "This is not a joke, Mr. Henderson," Sarah said, her voice flat. "Previous guards who ignored these rules don't work here anymore." The way she said it made me stop laughing right away. There was something in her eyes, not fear exactly, but knowledge, like she had seen things I couldn't imagine. "The night rounds are marked here," she continued, opening the logbook to show a map of the building with checkpoints circled in red. "Main floor at 9 p.m., second floor at 10, third floor at 11, main floor again at midnight, and so on. Sign the logbook at each checkpoint. The cameras cover most areas, but not all. That's why we need physical checks." She walked me through the building, pointing out emergency exits, alarm systems, and problem areas. The tour ended back at the security desk. "The day staff will arrive at 6 a.m. Your shift ends when they relieve you." Sarah handed me a flashlight. "Power outages happen occasionally. The backup generators only cover emergency lighting." She gathered her coat and bag, preparing to leave. "Any questions, Mr. Henderson?" I held up the rules. "These seem specific. Is there something I should know about this place?" Sarah paused at the door. "Just follow the rules. They're there for your protection." With that, she left, her footsteps carrying across the marble floor until the heavy front door closed behind her. And just like that, I was alone in a massive 3-story library. The first hour passed without incident. I made my initial rounds, checking that the main doors were secure and all windows locked. My footsteps bounced through the empty reading rooms. In the daylight, I imagined these spaces felt welcoming, quiet places for study and reflection. At night, with only half the lights on, the reading rooms felt empty and strange. By 9 p.m., I'd reached the main floor checkpoint. I signed the logbook and continued my patrol. The building made the normal settling sounds of an old structure, creaks and soft groans as the temperature dropped outside. Nothing unusual, but in the empty silence, each noise seemed louder. I tried to laugh off the strange rules. What kind of place needed to tell security guards not to talk to people after hours? Of course, nobody should be here. That was the whole point of having security. And why single out the children's section after 9 p.m.? The second floor checkpoint at 10 p.m. went smoothly. The reference section and study carrels stood empty and orderly. The third floor at 11 p.m. was equally quiet, just special collections and archives all locked behind glass doors. By the time I returned to the main floor for my midnight check, I'd convinced myself the rules were just an odd tradition, maybe left over from some incident years ago that had become policy. That's when the lights blinked. It wasn't dramatic, just a quick dimming, like someone had touched the main switch for a split second. I froze in the middle of the history section, waiting. The light steadied. I heard it then. Footsteps, soft but distinct, on the hardwood floor behind me. They moved slowly, deliberately. I turned, shining my flashlight down the row of shelves. Nothing. The footsteps stopped. I waited, listening. Silence. "Hello," I called, then immediately regretted it. Rule number 2 flashed in my mind. Do not acknowledge anyone in the building after closing. No one answered. I kept walking around, checking off the midnight main floor spot in the logbook. As I walked toward the computer lab for my check, I heard the footsteps start again behind me, keeping up with my pace but always stopping when I turned. The computer lab was a new part of the library, a room with 20 computers set up in rows. I pushed open the glass door and went inside. A man sat at the far computer, typing away. He had on what looked like an old suit, sitting very straight. The computer screen lit up his face with blue light, but I couldn't see his features clearly. I almost asked what he was doing there and how he got in after hours. I was about to speak when I remembered rule number 2. I made myself look away and finished checking the room like I hadn't seen him. The typing didn't stop. The man didn't turn. I finished my check and left the lab, feeling really nervous. Back at the security desk, I looked at the camera feeds. The computer lab camera showed empty desks, no man typing, nobody at all. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe I was seeing things, just shadows in a new place. I decided to check the upper floors again, even though they weren't due for another hour. When I passed the children's section on my way to the stairs, I heard a giggle, like a kid playing hide and seek. I checked my watch. 12:40 a.m. Rule 4 popped into my head. Stay out of the children's section after 9 p.m. I kept walking, trying to ignore the quiet laughter that followed me all the way to the stairs. The upper floors were quiet and empty. When I got back to the main level around 1:30 a.m., I thought I'd make some coffee in the staff room. That's when I heard it, scratching, quiet but steady, coming from the basement door at the back of the building. I went closer slowly, coffee forgotten. The scratching got louder as I got closer, starting to sound like fingernails dragging inside the wood. I remembered rule 3. Never open the basement door after midnight, no matter what you hear. The scratching stopped suddenly, replaced by a soft thump, like something heavy leaning against the door. I backed up, going back to the security desk where I could watch the door on camera. The basement camera showed only a dark stairwell with nothing moving. The rest of the night was tense. I did my rounds without thinking much, staying away from the children's section, ignoring the occasional footsteps that seemed to follow me, and keeping far from the basement door where the scratching started up again now and then. Around 5 a.m., with dawn coming and my shift almost over, I made my final round of the main floor. The library was quiet now. No footsteps, no scratching, no giggling. I started to feel a bit better. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild because of those strange rules in the empty building. I turned a corner into the fiction section and froze. A small girl stood in the middle of the aisle, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing an old-fashioned dress with a white collar. Her dark hair was in neat braids. "Can you help me find a book?" she asked, her voice sweet and clear in the silence. I opened my mouth, then closed it, remembering Rule 5. Do not engage with, assist, or speak to anyone who asks for help finding materials. The girl stepped closer, tilting her head. "Please? I've been looking all night." I took a step back, shaking my head slightly. She smiled then, a wide, stretching smile that went too far across her face, showing too many teeth. I backed away, keeping my eyes on her until I reached the end of the row, then turned and walked quickly toward the security desk. When I looked at the security monitors, the fiction section appeared empty. By the time the morning staff arrived at 6 a.m., I sat at the security desk, exhausted and shaken. Sarah was among the first to enter, giving me a knowing look as she approached. "How was your first night, Mr. Henderson?" she asked. I handed her the logbook with my signed checkpoints. "Fine," I lied. "Quiet." She looked at my face. "You followed the rules, I take it?" That's when it hit me. Every single rule had been tested during my first night. The footsteps, the man in the computer lab, the basement door, the children's section after 9 p.m., the little girl asking for help. "Yes," I said finally. "I followed the rules." Sarah nodded, looking relieved. "Good, that's good. We'll see you tonight then?" It wasn't really a question. I nodded anyway. The pay was too good to walk away from. Besides, I'd survived one night already. How bad could the second night be? I had been working at the Lincoln Public Library for 1 week, and I already knew I wasn't going crazy. After the first night, I'd told myself the strange occurrences were just my imagination, but 5 more shifts had confirmed everything was real. Too real. I sat at my kitchen table, pen above the journal I'd bought just for this purpose. Starting from my first night, I wrote down every weird thing that happened. The footsteps that followed me, but disappeared when I turned around. The man typing in the computer lab who wasn't on camera footage. The giggling in the children's section after 9 p.m. and the scratching from behind the basement door. That last one bothered me the most. I pressed the pen harder as I described it. The voices sounded really upset. Not like the little girl with her creepy smile or the stiff man at the computer. The basement voices begged for help. They called out in panic. Whatever was down there sounded human and afraid. My phone alarm interrupted my writing. Time to get ready for the evening shift. I closed the journal and put it in my backpack. No way I'd leave this where someone might find it. They'd think I needed serious help. When I arrived at the library just before 8 p.m., I saw Emily, the day librarian, still at the front desk. She looked up from her computer and waved me over. "Tom, how's it going with the night shifts? You look like you haven't slept in days." I thought about the dark circles under my eyes that greeted me in the mirror each morning. "Just adjusting to the schedule," I lied. "Night shifts take some getting used to." Emily tilted her head, concern crossing her face. "Listen, I'm heading out, but do you want to grab coffee tomorrow? I usually hit the cafe across from the public garden around 10 a.m. The offer caught me off guard. "Don't you need to be here during the day?" "I get a late start on Thursdays," she explained. "So, coffee?" I nodded. "Sounds good." After Emily left, Sarah appeared from the staff room for our nightly handoff. "Mr. Henderson," she said with that same formal tone she always used. "Anything to report?" I considered telling her about the voices from the basement, but thought better of it. "Everything's fine," I answered. She looked at me for a bit, then handed me the logbook. "The same rounds as usual. Keep to the schedule." She then packed up and left me alone for the night. After I finished my 9 p.m. rounds, I decided to check the security archive. The desk computer had footage going back several months, and I wanted to see if anyone else had noticed the weird stuff happening here. I looked through the dates until I found entries from 3 months ago when the previous guard was working here. The system showed videos by camera location and date. I clicked on the computer lab footage first. For almost an hour, I watched boring shots of empty rooms. Then I saw him. Michael making his rounds like I did. He walked quickly through the rooms. When he entered the computer lab, he stopped suddenly, just like I did when I saw the typing man. But instead of ignoring him like the rules said, Michael went up to the figure. There wasn't any sound, but I could see Michael talking. The seated man didn't move with his back to the camera. Then Michael reached out and put his hand on the man's shoulder. The room lights blinked on the footage. When they came back on, the typing man was gone. Michael looked confused, spinning around before walking out of the lab. I quickly switched to the hallway camera and saw Michael leaving the lab. He checked his watch, then went toward the main staircase. He started up the steps, then stopped, looking back like someone had called him. He turned and walked back down, heading toward the computer lab again, but he never showed up on any camera after that. I switched between different views, checking the computer lab, the hallway next to it, the main floor. Nothing. Michael had completely disappeared. I sat back in my chair, totally freaked out. The previous guard had broken rule number 2. Do not acknowledge anyone in the building after closing, and he had disappeared because of it. My 10 p.m. round was just going through the motions. I tried to focus on the checkpoints, but I kept thinking about Michael disappearing. Had those things taken him? Is that what happens when you break the rules? When I got back to the security desk, I decided to look through the guard logbook. Maybe Michael had written something weird before he vanished. I flipped back through the pages, past my own entries until I found the last entries from the previous guard. The last entry just said, 11 p.m. round complete. Nothing after that. No hint of trouble, no final message. I was so focused on the logbook that I almost missed it, all the lights getting dimmer throughout the building. I looked up just as every light on the main floor went out, leaving the library completely dark. I grabbed for my flashlight and turned it on. The light showed only a small path ahead of me. This wasn't like the short flicker from my first night. This was a total blackout. The backup generator should have started automatically, but nothing happened. I grabbed my radio from the desk. "This is Henderson. We've got a power outage. Is this affecting the whole building?" No response came back, just static. I tried again with the same result. A loud click came from the back of the building, the distinct sound of a lock turning. I moved my flashlight in that direction, lighting up rows of bookshelves, but nothing else. That's when I heard it. The basement door unlocking itself. I moved my flashlight across the security monitors, but they were all dark now. I was truly alone with whatever was in the library. I took a deep breath and began moving through the main floor, keeping my back to the wall. The narrow beam of my flashlight barely cut through the darkness. I needed to check the circuit breakers in the utility room near the staff entrance. As I moved past the fiction section, I heard something large move in the darkness just beyond my light's reach. A heavy sliding sound, like furniture being moved, followed by the soft pad of footsteps. I kept my flashlight pointed ahead, remembering rule number 2. Don't acknowledge anyone. Don't look. Don't engage. The footsteps circled around me, getting closer, then backing away. I quickened my pace toward the utility room. The air turned cold suddenly, cold enough that my breath fogged in front of my face. I heard whispering coming from multiple directions, not the childish giggling from before, but urgent, overlapping voices too quiet to make out the words. I was halfway to the utility room when I saw her. The little girl stood at the end of a row of shelves, her silhouette visible in my flashlight beam. This time, she wasn't smiling. Her expression was serious, almost adult-like. "You can't ignore us forever," she said, her voice deeper than before, like an adult woman speaking through a child's body. "We've been patient." I kept walking, pretending I hadn't seen or heard her. "The others thought ignoring us would work too," she continued, her voice following me, though I didn't look back. Michael thought that at first. Then he got curious. I reached the utility room door and fumbled with the keys, trying to find the right one by touch. "We're always here, Thomas," she said, using my name for the first time. "Always watching." I got the door open and slipped inside, pulling it closed behind me. My hand shook as I pointed the flashlight at the breaker panel. Several switches had flipped. I reset them one by one, and the emergency lights blinked back on, giving the building a dim light. I leaned against the wall, catching my breath. The little girl's words played over in my mind. They knew my name. Had I told any of them my name? I couldn't remember doing so. When I felt better, I opened the door and looked out. The hallway was empty now. I did a quick check of the main floor and saw that the basement door was closed and locked again. The rest of the night was quiet except for some footsteps here and there, and once, a cold hand that brushed against my shoulder during my final check at 5 a.m. When morning came and the lights went back to normal, I did a last check of the building. That's when I saw it, a bloody handprint on the wood of the checkout desk. The red really stood out against the dark surface, fingers spread wide like someone had slammed their hand down while running past. I backed away, almost tripping over a chair. Should I clean it before the day staff arrived? As I looked around for cleaning supplies, Emily walked through the front door. "Good morning," she called cheerfully. "Still on for coffee later?" I turned back to show her the handprint, but it was gone. The desk surface gleamed clean in the morning light. "Tom, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Emily set her bag down on the now clean desk. "I'm fine," I managed. "And yes, coffee sounds good. I have some questions about the library's history, if you don't mind." "I love library history talk." Emily smiled. "It's a date then." I grabbed my things and headed for the exit. I was still tired from the night. I pushed open the front door and looked back at the circulation desk where Emily was starting her day. For a second, I thought I saw a shadow standing behind her, tall and really still. I blinked, and it was gone. The daylight hit my face as I stepped outside, much brighter than the library's dim interior. I needed sleep before meeting Emily, but more than that, I needed answers. Why was this happening? What exactly were these entities? And what had happened to Michael? Maybe Emily could fill in some of the historical blanks. Until then, I'd keep documenting everything and following the rules, because now I knew what happened when you didn't. The cafe across from the Boston Public Garden was busy with the mid-morning rush when I arrived. I spotted Emily at a corner table with 2 coffee cups already waiting. "I got you a regular coffee," she said as I sat down. "Wasn't sure how you take it." "Black is perfect," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. Despite getting a few hours of sleep, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. Emily studied my face. "Night shift's really doing a number on you, huh?" I nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "It's an adjustment. Actually, I was hoping you could tell me more about the library. I like knowing the history of places I work." "Sure. What do you want to know?" I decided to start simple. "When was it built?" 1887, Emily answered immediately. "It was part of Boston's expansion of public services. Lincoln was one of the wealthiest benefactors at the time." "What was there before the library?" Emily stirred her coffee. "That's actually pretty dark. The land was used for public executions up until the early 1800s, mostly hangings from what I've read." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. "Executions? Right where the library stands?" "Yep, the gallows were supposedly right about where the central reading room is now. After they stopped the executions, the land sat empty for decades. Nobody wanted to build there." She must have noticed my expression because she added, "It sounds morbid, but lots of old Boston buildings are built on some pretty grim history. Has anyone ever—" I searched for a casual way to phrase it. "Has anyone ever died in the library? Or gone missing?" Emily's eyebrows rose. "That's a specific question. There were a couple of heart attacks over the years, old patrons among the stacks, and I think there was a staff member who disappeared sometime in the 90s. The rumor was he just walked out mid-shift and never came back." She leaned forward. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. Old buildings, Lots of history. I tried to sound casual. Do you ever feel like there's something off about the place? At night, I mean. Emily sat back, a slight frown on her face. Off how? I don't know. Strange noises, weird feelings, that sort of thing. She laughed a bit. All buildings make noise, especially old ones, and working alone at night would make anyone jumpy. She took a sip of her coffee. Though Sarah is still there when you start your shift, right? She's been at Lincoln forever. I swear she looks exactly the same in photos from decades ago. That caught my attention. There are old photos of Sarah around? In the library archives, yeah. Staff photos going way back. Sarah's in a bunch of them from the 50s and 60s. Must be her mom or aunt or something. The resemblance is uncanny. Emily checked her watch. I should head in soon. Any other questions about our spooky old library? I wanted to ask more about Sarah, about the missing staff member from the 90s, about whether Emily had ever encountered anything unusual. But I could see her closing off, her casual curiosity turning to suspicion at my questions. One last thing, I said. The basement. What's down there? Storage mostly. Old furniture, discarded books, holiday decorations, nothing exciting. Emily gathered her purse. Why? Need to go down there for your rounds? I thought about the voices I'd heard, the desperate cries for help. No, just wondering. Emily stood up. Well, this was nice. We should do it again sometime when you're less interested in ghost stories and more interested in getting to know your coworkers. Her tone was light but pointed. Sorry, I said quickly. It's the weird hours messing with me. I'd like to do this again. Her expression softened. Get some sleep, Tom. The library's just a building. Nothing to lose sleep over. As I watched Emily walk away, I couldn't help but think how wrong she was. The Lincoln Public Library was far more than just a building, and whatever it contained had already claimed at least one life that I knew of. And possibly it was coming for mine next. 2 weeks passed since my coffee meeting with Emily, and the library's nightly visitors had become my unwelcome routine. I'd started keeping detailed notes of each encounter, where they appeared, what they did, how they tested the rules. The typed man in the computer lab showed up like clockwork around midnight. The scratching at the basement door grew more insistent around 2 a.m. The child's laughter from the children's section could be heard, sometimes close, sometimes distant. But it was the knowledge that the previous guard had disappeared that kept me from sleeping soundly during daylight hours. I needed to know more about the library, about its history, about others who might have vanished like Michael. The Massachusetts Historical Society occupied a brownstone building in Back Bay. Its reading room smelled like old paper and wood polish. I approached the main desk where a gray-haired man sorted through a stack of folders. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm looking for information on the Lincoln Public Library, specifically any incidents or accidents that might have happened there." The man looked up at me through reading glasses. "Public records request? Or personal interest?" "Personal. I work there." He nodded. "I'm Robert Parker, head archivist. Lincoln's an interesting place. Let me see what we have." Robert took me to a research table and went into the stacks. He came back with several boxes and file folders. "This is what we've got on Lincoln. Newspaper clippings, public records, some personal accounts." He set them down with a small thud. "Any specific time period you're interested in? I want to know if people have gone missing there." Robert paused, tilted his head slightly. "Interesting question. Let's start with this." He pulled out a folder labeled Lincoln Library Incidents. The first article dated back to 1903. A librarian named Edward Simmons had vanished during his evening shift. The police report noted that his hat and coat remained at his desk, but he was nowhere to be found. The final entry in the staff log simply read, "Working late in the reference section." "Did they ever find him?" I asked. Robert shook his head. "No, and he wasn't the last." He handed me a timeline he'd compiled. I've been working on a history of Boston's public buildings. Lincoln caught my attention because of the pattern. The timeline documented 12 disappearances between 1903 and 1998. 3 night guards, 4 librarians, 5 patrons who had stayed after hours or been locked in accidentally. All of these people vanished without a trace. Not a single one was ever found, Robert confirmed. No bodies, no evidence of foul play, just gone. He pulled out another article. This one's interesting, 1932. A night guard reported strange occurrences for weeks before he disappeared. His journal was found, but not him. My heart beat faster. His journal. Is it here? No. Property of the library last I checked. Robert studied my face. You seem very invested in this. I chose my words carefully. The building has an unusual atmosphere at night. I'm curious about its history. The land was used for public executions before the library was built, Robert said. Some believe that leaves a mark on a place. You believe that? He smiled thinly. I document history, Mr. Henderson. I don't interpret it. But I will say this. Lincoln has more documented disappearances than any other public building in Boston's history. I thanked Robert and spent the rest of the afternoon photographing articles and making notes. Each disappearance followed a pattern: night hours, staff or patrons alone, no signs of struggle. The most recent was William Carson, a guard who vanished in 1998. His last log entry, something scratching at the basement door. When I arrived at the library for my shift that evening, I had an hour before Sarah would leave me alone for the night. I needed to use that time to search for the journal Robert had mentioned. Going somewhere? Sarah asked as I walked past the circulation desk. Just checking the building before my rounds, I replied. She watched me with that knowing look I'd come to expect. The encyclopedia section hasn't been used in days, no need to patrol there yet. I nodded and walked away, wondering if her comment was a hint or a warning. The encyclopedia section was in a quiet corner of the main floor, old books arranged on floor-to-ceiling shelves. Nobody consulted printed encyclopedias anymore. They sat untouched, gathering dust. I ran my fingers along the shelves, looking for anything unusual. Near the back wall, I noticed a small gap between the shelving unit and the wall. When I pushed on it, the shelf moved slightly. Behind it was a plain door with no markings. I tried each key on my ring until one clicked in the lock. The door swung open, showing a small room lined with filing cabinets. Dust covered everything, except for a narrow path of footprints that led to the center cabinet. I followed the path and pulled open the middle drawer. Inside were folders labeled by year, going back to the library's opening. I grabbed the folder from 1932, the year Robert had mentioned a guard's journal was found. The folder contained maintenance records, staff logs, and a typed note. Personal effects of Jacob Miller, night guard, found abandoned at security desk, April 14, 1932. Journal placed in historical records. I checked the next drawer and found a section labeled Staff Records, Historical. Inside was a leather-bound book with J. Miller stamped on the cover. Footsteps approached the open door. I stuffed the journal into my jacket and quickly closed the drawers. Sarah stood in the doorway. Find what you were looking for? Just exploring, I said, getting to know the building better. That's sensible, she replied. Knowledge is protection, but some doors are better left closed. She stepped aside. It's almost 8. I'll be leaving soon. Once Sarah was gone, I finished my first round quickly, then went back to the security desk to look at Jacob's journal. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting cramped but readable. The first entries were boring. Building temperatures, maintenance requests, notes about visitors. Then, 3 weeks in, saw a man in the reference section tonight, didn't respond when I called out. When I approached, he vanished. Reported to head librarian, who says this is not unusual. The entries grew increasingly strange. The man appeared again, this time at the card catalog. I watched him for an hour. He never moved, just stood with his back to me. Mr. Williams says to leave him be. Voices from the basement again. They sound like children, but there are no children here at night. We'll investigate tomorrow. Mr. Williams says never to open the basement door after dark. Says it's for my own safety. The man spoke to me tonight. Asked my name. When I told him, he smiled. Never seen teeth like that on a human face. The final entry was short. They know me now. They come every night. Mr. Williams says I've broken the rules. Says I've let them in. Nothing after that. Just blank pages. Jacob Miller had disappeared the next day, according to Robert's records. My rounds continued through the night. Each time I passed the children's section, the giggling grew louder. The man in the computer lab seemed to watch me, even though he never turned around. The scratching at the basement door sounded like multiple hands now, accompanied by muffled voices calling names I couldn't quite make out. Around 2 a.m., I spotted David mopping the main floor. He worked carefully, backing away from the children's section. There was still visible dirt on the floor there. Need some help? I asked, approaching him. David jumped, nearly dropping his mop. Christ, man, don't sneak up on people in this place. Sorry, just noticed you're skipping the children's area. David's face hardened. That's right. And you should too, especially after 9. Why's that? He looked around nervously. You know why. You've been here long enough. David leaned closer, lowering his voice. You've seen them, haven't you? The directness of his question caught me off guard. Seen who? Don't play dumb. The ones who come at night. The ones we pretend aren't there. I looked at his face. David had worked here for years, according to Emily. He'd survived this long, which meant he knew something. The man in the computer lab, I said finally. The little girl. The voices from the basement. David nodded, looking relieved. So you have seen them, and you're still here, which means you're following the rules. He glanced at my hair. So far, anyway. What are they? Why are they here? He went back to mopping, moving us away from the children's section. They're collectors, he said quietly. They take people who acknowledge them, break a rule, and you become part of this place. Not right away, but eventually. Like Michael, the previous guard. David winced. Yeah, like Michael. Like William before him. Like all 12 of them since this place opened. The rules, I said. They've changed over time, haven't they? Jacob's journal from 1932 mentions different instructions. David looked surprised. You found Jacob's journal? Where? Records room behind the encyclopedias. Huh, didn't know about that one. He wrung out his mop. Yeah, the rules change. Every time someone vanishes, we learn something new. Trial and error, you might say. Paid for in blood. Tell me about them, the entities. David sighed, leaning on his mop handle. The man in the computer lab? He was the first. A librarian back in 1903 when the place first opened. Technology was different then. Card catalogs instead of computers. But he's always been about the same thing. Information, progress. He takes the curious ones. And the basement? That's older than the building. Much older. Remember what this land was used for before? Executions, I said, thinking of what Robert and Emily had told me. That's right. Public hangings. All that fear and violence soaks into a place. David shuddered. Whatever's down there feeds on fear. It mimics voices, calls for help. Makes you want to rescue someone. But there's no one to rescue, not anymore. What about the little girl? She's the worst of them. Looks harmless, but she's not. She's the stories. All the dark things people find in books. The thoughts they don't want to admit having. She asks for help finding a book. But what she really wants is to find you. To add you to her collection. The lights blinked suddenly, plunging us into darkness for a second before returning, dimmer than before. David's face went pale. They're listening. They always are. He gathered his cleaning supplies quickly. Word of advice? Never tell them your name. Names have power. Once they know who you are, really know you, that's when they can take you. But why do they want people? What happens to the ones who vanish? Don't know. Don't want to know. David backed away. Just follow the rules. That's all any of us can do. He hurried off toward the staff exit, leaving his floor still half cleaned. I stood alone in the quiet library, processing what he'd told me. 12 people gone without a trace. The entities growing stronger, evolving, adding new rules with each person they took. A soft, cold breath brushed against the back of my neck. I turned slowly, already knowing what I would find. The little girl stood inches behind me, so close I could have reached out and touched her. Her white dress looked bright in the dim light. Her smile stretched too wide, revealing row after row of needle-sharp teeth. "Hello, Thomas," she said, using my name for the second time. "Want to help me find a book?" The little girl stood inches from me with a super-wide smile full of sharp teeth. I tried to stay calm as I remembered David's warning that she was the worst of them all. I kept my face blank, pretending I couldn't see or hear her. I backed away slowly, acting like I was just checking the shelves. The girl's smile dropped. "That's not nice, Thomas. I know you can hear me." I continued backing away, keeping my eyes unfocused. My hand touched the wall behind me as I moved toward the main hall. The girl tilted her head to one side, moving way too quick. "Fine, we have time. Lots and lots of time." She disappeared in a blink. The spot where she had stood was empty. I rushed back to the security desk, my hands shaking as I wrote down everything that happened. What David had told me matched what I'd seen. These things knew me now. They were watching me, learning me. Late October brought cold winds and early darkness. The trees in the public garden were mostly bare now. I'd survived a month at the Lincoln Public Library, but it was getting to me. Each night brought new encounters, each one more aggressive than the last. The computer lab man no longer stayed at his terminal, but walked around the stacks. The giggling from the children's section had grown louder, sounding like many young voices instead of just one. And the scratching at the basement door never stopped. I'd learned to block out the sounds, to ignore the moving shapes out of the corner of my eye, to pretend I didn't notice when books pulled themselves from shelves and floated in the air. The rules kept me safe, even though I wanted to know more about these things and what they really wanted. That night I arrived for my shift to find the library unusually quiet. Sarah handed me the logbook with a worried look. "The basement has been active today," she said. "Stay clear of it, no matter what you hear." I nodded, thinking of Jacob's journal and what he'd written about the basement containing something that predated the building itself. Something connected to the public executions that had once taken place on this land. "I'll check the rest of the building first," I said. Sarah studied my face. "Mr. Henderson, remember the rules. They exist for a reason." After she left, I completed my 9 p.m. round of the main floor, noting that nothing seemed out of place. The usual creaking of the old building was the only sound. When I checked the basement door at 10 p.m., all was quiet. No scratching, no voices. The 11 p.m. and midnight rounds passed without incident. I began to think this might be one of the rare, peaceful nights. Then, at 12:45 a.m. it started. A soft tap against the basement door, then another, then a scrape of what sounded like nails against the wood. I sat at the security desk, watching the basement door on the monitor. The camera showed nothing unusual, just the closed door at the end of the hall. The scratching intensified, becoming frantic. Then I heard a voice. "Hello? Is someone there? Please. Please help me." The voice was male, adult, and terrified, not the childlike voices I'd heard before. "I'm trapped down here," the voice continued. "Please. It's William Carson. I've been down here since '98. William Carson. The name from the historical records. the guard who disappeared in 1998. Please, the voice begged. I can't hold on much longer. They'll come back soon. Please open the door. I held the edge of the desk. Rule 3. Never open the basement door after midnight. But what if William was really down there? What if he'd been trapped for 22 years watching guard after guard ignore his pleas for help? I'm dying. The voice cracked. Please. I know you can hear me. Just open the door. Let me out before they come back. I tried to focus on my rounds, checking each floor methodically, but when I returned to the main level, the voice had grown more desperate. They're coming back. Oh God, they're coming back. Please, please. A loud thud hit the door, making it shudder in its frame. Then another. The hinges creaked under the pressure. Help me! William's voice screamed, raw with terror. For God's sake, help me! I grabbed my flashlight and ran to the basement door. The wood vibrated under my palm as I placed my hand against it. The voice on the other side sobbed. Please, it whispered. I'm so scared. I've been alone in the dark for so long. I thought of Michael, the previous guard. Had he heard these same pleas? Had he opened this door and been taken because of it? But what if it really was William? What kind of person would I be if I left him to suffer? The logical part of my brain screamed at me to walk away, to follow the rules, to survive. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave someone in pain when I had the power to help. My hand shook as I took out my keys. Everything went quiet as I slid the key into the lock. I'm coming, I said, breaking Rule 2 by acknowledging the voice. Stand back from the door. The scratching stopped. The sobs quieted. I turned the key and pulled the door open a few inches. It was completely dark. No sound, no movement, no sign of William or anyone else. I pushed the door open wider. William? Nothing, just silence and darkness so dark that my flashlight didn't help much. Something wasn't right. I felt like I'd made a terrible mistake. I started to back away, to close the door. That's when I saw them. Long, thin fingers wrapping around the edge of the door. Very white, with joints that bent in weird ways. The nails were black and curved like claws. I slammed the door shut as hard as I could. A weird cry came from the other side. Not human, not animal, but something in between. I turned the key, locking whatever it was on the other side. The fingers were still caught in the door, moving and scratching against the wood. Black liquid dripped from where the door had crushed them, making a puddle on the floor at my feet. It smelled like copper and rot. I backed away, watching in horror as the fingers moved, trying to pull free. More black liquid leaked from under the door, spreading across the floor. The weird crying continued, going up and down in a strange way. The lights in the hallway blinked, then got dim. I turned and ran toward the stairs. I needed to get away from whatever was stuck in that door. As I reached the second floor, I saw him. The computer lab man stood at the end of the hallway, blocking my path. Usually he kept his back to me, but now he faced me directly. For the first time I could see his eyes. They caught the dim emergency lighting and looked like an animal's. Yellow-green circles in the darkness. I froze. Rule 2. Do not acknowledge anyone in the building after closing. The man took a step toward me, then another. He moved weirdly, like a puppet. His eyes never blinked. I had nowhere to go. Behind me, the inhuman crying continued from the basement. Ahead of me, the computer lab man walked toward me with his strange walk. I closed my eyes. If I couldn't see him, I couldn't acknowledge him. If I couldn't acknowledge him, he couldn't harm me. That was how the rules worked. With my eyes still closed, I walked forward, directly toward where he stood. It was freezing cold as I passed through where he should have been. The air felt like ice water in my lungs. My skin felt very cold. For a moment, I heard whispers. Lots of voices saying things I couldn't understand. Then I was through. Trying to catch my breath on the other side, I opened my eyes. The hallway behind me was empty. The computer lab man was gone. I spent the rest of the night hiding in the small office behind the circulation desk, listening to the weird cries from the basement slowly change to whimpers, then silence. The black liquid hadn't spread beyond the basement door, but I could still smell its copper rot stench throughout the building. When morning arrived, I checked the basement door. The fingers were gone, but deep scratches marked the wood where they had tried to free themselves. The black liquid had dried up and flaked away when I touched it. I went to the staff bathroom to splash water on my face before the day shift arrived. That's when I saw it in the mirror, white streaks in my hair, starting at my temples and spreading backward. The hair hadn't just changed color. It looked decades older than the rest. Sarah found me still staring at my reflection. "You broke a rule," she said. It wasn't a question. I turned to face her. The basement. Something was trapped in the door. She nodded, her expression unsurprised. "The third rule is perhaps the most important. What's in the basement is older than any of us. Older than the building itself." She reached up and touched her own hair, which I now noticed had similar white streaks running through it. "You're learning the hard way, just like the rest of us." Sarah's words stayed between us. "You're learning the hard way, just like the rest of us." She reached for my hair, almost touching the white streaks that weren't there yesterday. I stepped back, away from her touch. What happened to me? The same thing that happened to me. Sarah turned to leave the bathroom. "Complete your shift, Mr. Henderson. We'll talk another time." 6 weeks had passed since I started working at the Lincoln Public Library. 6 weeks of nightly encounters with entities that shouldn't exist. 6 weeks of following rules designed to keep me alive. The white streaks in my hair had become more pronounced since the night I opened the basement door. A permanent reminder of my mistake. I'd gotten used to seeing them in the mirror each morning. I'd spent the weeks researching everything I could about the library's history. The Historical Society had yielded some information, but not enough. I needed more. Tonight, I arrived early for my shift. The autumn evening had already darkened the sky, bringing early shadows to the library's grand exterior. Inside, the regular patrons were gathering their belongings, preparing to leave before closing. "You're early," Sarah noted from behind the circulation desk. "Wanted to get settled in," I replied. She looked at me with that same knowing expression she always wore, like she could see right through my excuses. "Be careful with your curiosity, Mr. Henderson. It's a valuable trait, until it isn't." Once Sarah left and the building emptied, I began my rounds. The library felt different tonight, quieter somehow. The usual creaks and settling sounds were muted. Even the entities seemed to be holding their breath. After completing my 9 p.m. check, I returned to the security desk. I'd been sitting at this desk for weeks now, monitoring cameras, recording my observations, tracking the entities' movements. But tonight, I looked at the desk itself with new eyes. It was an old piece of furniture, heavy oak with deep drawers on either side. The kind of desk that had been built to last centuries. The surface was worn smooth from decades of use, small scratches and stains marking its history. I ran my fingers along the underside of the desktop. The wood felt uneven in spots, with subtle ridges that didn't match the craftsmanship of the rest of the piece. I pushed against one section that seemed slightly different from the rest. A small click, then silence. I pushed again, harder this time. The wood gave way, sliding back to reveal a hidden compartment I never would have noticed if I hadn't been looking for it. Inside the narrow space was a leather journal, similar to Jacob's but smaller, with no name stamped on the cover. Next to it lay a small metal box. I pulled out both items and placed them on the desk. The journal's leather was cracked with age, its pages yellowed and brittle. The metal box was rusted at the corners but still intact. The first entry in the journal was dated April 20th, 1932, a week after Jacob Miller had disappeared according to the historical records. I found this empty journal in Jacob's desk after they declared him missing. Something happened to him in this place. I aim to find out what, without meeting the same fate. HS. The entries continued, detailing HS's observations during night shifts. Unlike Jacob, this writer seemed more cautious, documenting the entities without engaging them. May 10th, 1932. Saw the man tonight. He stood by the reference desk for hours without moving. When I checked the roster of former employees, I found Edward Simmons, head reference librarian who vanished in 1903. The photograph matches. May 15th, 1932. The children's section houses something that giggles. It moves books from shelves, rearranges the reading circle. I've started looking into the history of that section. It was once a storytelling room where hundreds of children gathered each week to hear tales of wonder and horror. May 30th, 1932. The basement scratching grows worse each night. I've traced the building's history. Before the library, this land held the gallows. Those condemned faced their death here, but also gained knowledge of what awaits beyond. Their fear still lives in that soil. June 10th, 1932. I've been watching the little girl. She appears in different sections, always asking for help. Today I noticed something. She appears most often in fiction, particularly near the darker stories. She embodies the shadows in these tales. June 28th, 1932. I've come to understand that these entities aren't malevolent by nature. They're hungry for connection. Each represents how this library connects people to knowledge. This last entry hit me hard. The ghosts weren't just random hauntings. They had purpose, meaning. They were connected to the library's function in ways I hadn't thought about. I read on, learning how HS had created the early version of the rules, finding patterns in how the ghosts behaved. The writer documented how each ghost represented a different part of the library's purpose. The computer lab man, originally the reference librarian, represented the technological changes in information. He'd changed as the library changed, moving from physical books to digital catalogs to modern computers. The basement contained what HS called the fears we all hide deep down. It was where hidden knowledge lived, the kind that most people avoided facing. The giggling presence in the children's section stood for childhood imagination, the wonder and fear of discovering stories for the first time. And the little girl, perhaps the most dangerous, represented the darker parts of stories, the things about ourselves we see in fiction but can't admit to in real life. October 15th, 1932. I've established rules that seem to keep me safe. The entities cannot harm those who don't acknowledge them. They exist only when given attention. I'm sharing these rules with the head librarian tomorrow. God willing, no one else will disappear from this place. The journal ended there. No indication of what happened to HS or whether they survived their time at the library. I put the journal aside and opened the metal box. Inside were photographs, newspaper clippings, and staff records from the library's history. I laid them across the desk, looking at each one carefully. A staff photo from 1954 caught my eye. It showed a group of librarians standing on the front steps of the building. In the center of the back row was a woman who looked exactly like Sarah. The caption called her Sarah Miller, head librarian. I started to shake as I looked at the photograph more closely. It wasn't just a resemblance, it was her. The same face, the same way of standing, even the same cold look in her eyes. The only difference was that the white streaks in her hair were missing in the photograph. I looked through the box and found more photos. Sarah was in staff pictures from 1960, 1972, and 1989, always looking exactly the same, never getting older. The last item in the box was a newspaper clipping from 1952 with the headline, "Local Librarian Hospitalized After Late Night Incident." The article said that Sarah Miller had been found unconscious in the library after working late. She had gotten better, but wouldn't talk about what had happened. 1952, 2 years before the staff photo where she already looked exactly as she did today, 70 years later. I sat back, trying to make sense of it all. Sarah hadn't just worked here long. She'd worked here for at least 70 years without aging. And according to the newspaper, something had happened to her in 1952. The pieces clicked together. The white streaks in her hair, just like mine. The way she made sure everyone followed the rules. The comment she'd made after seeing my hair. "You're learning the hard way, just like the rest of us." Sarah had broken a rule, just as I had. I put everything back in the hidden compartment except the 1954 staff photo, which I slipped into my pocket. I did my nighttime rounds on autopilot, my mind racing with questions. The entities showed up as usual. The giggling from the children's section, the man in the computer lab, the scratching at the basement door. But now I saw them differently, understanding their connections to the library itself. When dawn came and the front door opened, I was waiting. Sarah walked in, looking as neat as always in her dark suit. She stopped when she saw my face. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson. Is everything all right?" I pulled out the photograph and held it up. "How long have you worked here, Sarah? Really?" She closed the door behind her, shutting out the early morning light. Her eyes moved from the photograph to my face. "Where did you find that?" "Hidden compartment in the security desk. There's a journal there too, from someone who worked here after Jacob disappeared. It says a lot about the entities, about what they really are." Sarah looked tired suddenly, more than just end-of-shift fatigue. She placed her bag on the circulation desk. "We should talk in my office." I followed her to the small room behind the circulation desk. Sarah's office seemed frozen in time. The desk was vintage, the telephone rotary, the filing cabinets metal instead of plastic. She sat behind her desk and gestured for me to take the chair opposite her. "I broke Rule 5 in 1952, she said without preamble. "A young woman asked me to help her find materials on local history. It was after hours. I knew the rules, but she seemed so lost. So human." Sarah's gaze drifted to the photograph I'd placed on her desk. "They took part of me, but I survived. Now I make sure others don't make the same mistakes." "What happened to you?" I asked. "The entities exist beyond our understanding of time. They took my future, my aging, my natural progression through life. I remain as I was that night, watching decades pass while I stay unchanged." Her fingers brushed against the white streaks in her hair. "These appeared immediately, just like yours did, a marker of their touch. The journal said they weren't malevolent originally, that they represent aspects of the library's purpose." Sarah nodded. "Yes, but they've changed. Each time someone breaks a rule and knows about them, they get stronger, more independent, more hungry." She leaned forward. "When this library was first built, the rules weren't needed. These things were just part of the building's character. They weren't dangerous back then. But people's fear gave them power. What people believed turned them into something dangerous. So the rules don't just protect us from them?" I asked. "The rules protect everyone," Sarah replied. "Every time an entity successfully takes someone, it grows more powerful, more separate from its original purpose. If enough rules are broken, enough people taken, the entities could eventually extend their reach beyond these walls." Her words hit me hard. I thought of Michael, the previous guard who had vanished after touching the computer lab man, of Jacob, who had documented his experiences until he disappeared, of William, whose voice still called from the basement. "How many people know about this?" I asked. "Very few. Most who discover the truth either leave immediately or become part of the library." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Those of us who remain marked but free carry the responsibility to maintain the balance." "Is that why you've stayed all these years? To protect people?" "Someone must. I made a choice in 1952 that altered my existence forever. I can't undo that, but I can prevent others from making worse mistakes." She picked up the photograph, studying her unchanged face. "The entities allowed me to survive because I serve a purpose. I enforce the rules. I maintain order." But I broke a rule, I said, touching the white in my hair. I opened the basement door. Yes, and you'll carry that mark forever, but you stopped before they could take all of you. Sarah handed the photograph back to me. You have a choice now, Mr. Henderson. You can walk away from this place, live your life with a few white hairs and occasional nightmares, or you can stay and help maintain the balance. What happens if the balance fails? Sarah looked at her office window as the morning got brighter. Then the hunger inside those things could get out beyond these walls. The rules don't just protect us, Thomas. They protect everyone. 3 months had passed since Sarah revealed her true nature to me. 3 months of learning how the entities behave, writing down what they do, and looking into the history of the Lincoln Public Library. I now understood why the white streaks in my hair never went away. They showed I had touched something weird that most people don't understand. I came in from my shift like normal, nodding to Emily as she packed up to leave. The library had just closed to the public, and the last people were walking out the front doors. Another quiet day, Emily said, pulling on her coat. Though we had a power flicker this afternoon, computers went down for about 10 seconds. Probably just the weather, I said, glancing at the cloudy night sky through the windows. They're calling for storms tonight. Emily looked at me with that mixture of concern and curiosity she'd worn since my hair had changed. She never asked about it directly, but I could tell she wondered. Sarah's in her office, she said, heading for the door. Take care tonight, Tom. I watched her leave, then made my way to Sarah's office. Sarah sat at her desk, sorting through paperwork. The room was filled with items from different decades. A rotary phone from the 50s, a modern computer, and really old filing cabinets. Good evening, Mr. Henderson, she said without looking up. Evening, I leaned against the door frame. Everything normal today? Sarah paused, her pen hovering over a form. The power fluctuation is concerning. The entities have never affected external systems before. Since our conversation 3 months ago, Sarah had become more open about the library's secrets. She'd shown me records dating back to the building's construction, explained the true nature of each entity, and helped me understand the rules that kept us safe. I'll keep an eye on things, I said. Sarah nodded, then checked her watch. It's time for me to leave. Call if anything unusual happens. After she left, I began my rounds. The 9 p.m. check of the main floor was uneventful. The building creaked and settled as usual, but the entities remained dormant. I noted in the logbook that all doors were secure and moved on to the second floor. At 9:48 p.m., I was checking the reference section when the lights blinked. Not unusual in an old building, but I felt a chill run down my back. I checked my watch. The entities typically didn't become active until after midnight. Their patterns had been consistent for months. I continued my round, more alert now. When I reached the computer lab, I noticed something odd. All the monitors were on, glowing blue in the dim light, even though they had been shut down for the night. I stayed in the doorway, not entering the room. The man who typically appeared at midnight wasn't visible yet, but the active computers were a break-in pattern. I made a note in my small pocket journal and continued my round. By 10:30 p.m., I had finished checking the third floor and returned to the main level. Everything seemed normal, but the nervous feeling wouldn't go away. I sat at the security desk and reviewed the camera feeds. Nothing out of place. At 11:17 p.m., the power went out completely. I waited for the backup generator to kick in, but only the emergency exit signs lit up with a red glow. Through the windows, I could see that the entire street was dark. This wasn't just the library. The whole neighborhood had lost power. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, trying the second channel. Security to Sarah, do you copy? Static answered me. I clicked to the facilities channel. Security to maintenance. Generator status? More static. I pulled out Jacob's journal and the notes I'd collected over the past months. Something wasn't right. The entities had never affected systems outside the building before. Sarah's concern about the earlier power fluctuation now seemed right on the money. A soft giggle came from the children's section, hours before its usual time. My flashlight shined in the darkness as I turned toward the sound. Nothing there, but the giggling continued, growing louder, joined by other kids' voices. I backed away, keeping to the main aisle. The rules had protected me for months. Don't investigate strange noises. Don't acknowledge anyone in the building after closing. Never open the basement door after midnight. Stay out of the children's section after 9 p.m. And don't engage with anyone asking for help finding materials. But tonight felt different. The rules assumed the entities would follow their own patterns. A loud crack rang through the building. I pointed my flashlight toward the sound and saw the basement door moving in its frame. Another crack, and the wood splintered around the hinges. I backed toward the security desk. The basement entity had never tried to break through before. It had always just scratched and called, trying to lure security guards into opening the door. The monitors in the security office turned on even though the power was out. Each screen showed the computer lab man standing behind a terminal, looking directly at the camera. Not one image of him, but 12 identical figures on 12 different screens. He had never appeared in multiple places before. The basement door blew outward with a final crack, wood splinters flying across the hall. Darkness flowed from the opening, thick and heavy. It spread across the floor. My flashlight couldn't light up the darkness. I backed up the main aisle, trying to keep away from both the basement entity and the children's section, where the giggling had become a chorus of laughter. Something cold brushed against my ankle. I looked down to see the darkness from the basement moving around my feet, climbing up my legs. I kicked at it, but my foot passed through with only the feeling of biting cold. Thomas. The voice came from the center aisle ahead of me. I raised my flashlight to see the little girl walking slowly toward me. Her white dress caught the red emergency lighting, her black hair hanging loose around her shoulders. Her face was different tonight, less human, the features sharper, the smile wider than any human mouth could stretch. "We're tired of the rules," she said, her voice resonating with others behind it, like a crowd speaking through one small body. "We've been patient. We've played the game, but now we're hungry." I kept backing away, remembering what Sarah had told me about the entities growing stronger each time someone broke a rule. Each mistake fed them, made them more powerful, more independent from their original purpose. "You can't ignore us anymore," the girl continued, her steps measured, unhurried. "We know you now, Thomas Henderson. We know your fears, your thoughts. We've been watching you study us. Did you think we weren't studying you too?" The darkness from the basement had spread throughout the main floor now, stretching up the walls. The giggling from the children's section had gotten louder and louder. On the security monitors, the 12 identical librarians started moving together, stepping away from their computers. I needed a plan. The entities had never teamed up like this before. They'd never broken their own rules. Jacob's journal, HS's notes, the building's history. I suddenly remembered something I'd read in the archives. The library had been built with protections, symbols built into the architecture itself. The original builders had known about the land's dark past and had added safety measures, the fire alarms. HS had written about a protection system connected to the original alarm network. I ran to the nearest alarm and pulled it. Nothing happened. No sound. No sprinklers. The power outage must have affected it too. The little girl laughed, her voice cutting through all the giggles and whispers that now filled the building. "Your tools won't work tonight," she said. "We've grown beyond your rules, beyond your protections." I thought frantically. The original system wouldn't have relied solely on electricity. Old buildings had mechanical backups, systems that worked on water pressure or springs. I ran toward the staff area, toward the original part of the building. The little girl followed, her pace never changing, yet somehow she never fell behind. The darkness from the basement flowed with me, around me, trying to trip me. In the old service corridor, I found what I was looking for: a red metal box mounted on the wall, labeled Fire Alarm 1887. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades, covered in dust and cobwebs. I smashed the glass with my flashlight and pulled the lever inside. A deep, mechanical gonging sound spread through the building. Nothing like the modern electric alarms. This was a massive bell, the sound rumbling through the walls themselves. The little girl stopped, her unnaturally wide smile dropping. I ran to the next alarm box at the end of the corridor and pulled it too. Another gonging joined the first, the sounds overlapping, creating a pattern. The darkness around my feet backed away slightly. I remembered the floor plans I'd studied in the archives. There were 5 original alarm stations arranged in a specific pattern throughout the building. I needed to activate all of them. The third alarm was at the base of the main staircase. As I ran toward it, I saw the darkness pulling back from the walls, revealing something I'd never noticed before. Symbols carved into the wood paneling, now glowing with a faint blue light. Very old symbols of protection that had been hidden under layers of paint and time. I pulled the third alarm. The gonging grew louder, more insistent. The little girl was no longer following me. Instead, she stood in the center of the main floor, her head tilted as if listening. The giggling from the children's section had changed to whimpers. The fourth alarm was on the second floor. I took the stairs 2 at a time, the darkness trying to grab at my ankles but backing away from the growing blue light that now pulsed from the symbols on the walls. When I reached the fourth alarm and pulled it, the building seemed to shake with the overlapping bells. The symbols glowed brighter, forming lines of light that connected across walls and floors, creating a network of protection throughout the building. The computer lab man appeared at the end of the hallway, but he couldn't approach. The lines of blue light formed a barrier he couldn't cross. I had 1 more alarm to pull. The 5th was in the archives room. I ran down the hallway, the blue light growing stronger with each step. The archives room door was locked, but I had the keys. My hands shook as I tried to find the right one. Behind me, I heard the little girl's voice, sounding strained now. "Stop." I got the door open and rushed inside. The archives room housed the library's oldest and most valuable documents. In the center of the room stood a glass case containing the original deed to the property. The 5th alarm box was mounted on the wall behind the case. I pulled it, and the final gong joined the others, creating a resonance that made my teeth vibrate. The blue light from the symbols flared, bright enough to light up the entire building, but it wasn't enough. I could feel the entities regrouping, pushing against the barriers of light. The little girl's voice carried throughout the building. "This won't hold us. We've grown too strong." I remembered what HS had written in their journal. The entities were connected to the building through its history, its purpose. The deed in the glass case represented the original binding of the land to its new purpose as a library. It was the physical link between the entities and the building. I smashed the glass case with a paperweight from the curator's desk. The alarms kept ringing as I lifted the very old document from the broken case. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still readable. This deed had transformed execution grounds into a place of learning. "No!" The little girl's scream echoed through the building, filled with rage and fear. I took my lighter from my pocket, a habit from my former smoking days, and held it to the corner of the document. The paper caught immediately, flames burning up the dry parchment. The effect was instant. The darkness pulled back completely toward the basement. The giggling stopped. The computer lab man disappeared from all monitors. The little girl's scream cut off suddenly, as the deed burned to ash in my hands. The blue light from the symbols pulsed once more, then faded. The gonging of the alarm slowed, then stopped. The emergency lights blinked, and then the main power came back on, with normal lighting throughout the building. I stood in the archives room, surrounded by broken glass and ashes, exhausted, but alive. The clock on the wall read 5:47 a.m. Dawn was coming. I made my way back to the main floor. Everything looked normal. Books on shelves, furniture in place. The basement door hung broken on its hinges, but beyond it I saw only ordinary darkness, not the strange blackness from before. The front doors opened, and Sarah walked in. She stopped when she saw me, looking at my messy appearance and the ashes on my hands. Her eyes moved to the basement door, then back to me. "You've reset the balance," she said simply. "The rules will work again, for now." I nodded, too tired for questions. "The deed?" she asked. "Burned." She closed her eyes briefly. "That was the right choice. The connection has been severed temporarily. It will reform, of course. These buildings always do. But you've bought us time." I looked around at the library, now quiet in the morning light. "What happens now?" "Now you make your choice," Sarah said. "You can walk away, live your life, or you can stay and join those of us who maintain the balance." I understood the choice before me. I could leave this place with its dangers, try to forget what I'd seen. Or I could stay and fight a battle that had gone on for centuries, a battle to contain the entities, to maintain the rules, to protect people from these threats. I looked down at my flashlight. I thought of Michael, of Jacob, of William, of all those who had come before me. I thought of the white streaks in my hair that would never fade, showing I'd seen things most people couldn't imagine. I picked up my security logbook from the desk and wrote a simple entry. 6 a.m., all secure. I had made my choice. I was staying.